8 seconds. That's all it takes to shatter everything you thought you knew about human decency. In the autumn of 1834, nestled deep within the woods of Albemarle County, Virginia, there stood a weather-beaten colonial home, quiet, forgotten. But beneath its rotting floorboards, a truth so grotesque, so buried in silence, it never made it into your history books. Because in that basement, 47 children were found, chained, starving, forgotten. Let that sink in. This isn't fiction. This isn't urban legend. This is real. A story so dark it was erased from every official record, and yet whispered among local families for nearly 2 centuries. The Sullivan family name has all but vanished from public archives. No census, no burial, no trial, and yet the scars they left are still felt. You see, the Sullivan property wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. A breeding ground, a factory of something unholy. The children, malnourished, near feral, with numbers carved into their skin, weren't theirs. Some of them didn't even speak English. Many didn't speak at all. Local accounts claimed to hear strange chanting late into the night. Others saw deliveries made in covered wagons, children wrapped in burlap sacks, silent, unmoving. But it wasn't until a local preacher followed the stench of rotting meat through the woods that the horror was exposed. And what he saw in that candlelit basement changed him forever. You were never meant to hear this. You were never meant to know. But now that you do, there's no going back. Because the truth about the Sullivan family isn't just about one basement. It's about a system, a pattern. A legacy of darkness passed hand to hand like an heirloom among the elite. You want to go further. Good. But I warn you, you're already too deep. The town of Wytheville, Virginia was a place no one looked twice at, nestled quietly between rolling hills and dirt roads. Its people were reserved, polite, and devout. But Ellie, imagine the air thick with damp mildew and decay. The candlelight flickering against stone walls etched with claw marks and symbols not found in any holy book. This was not a basement. This was a holding chamber, a ritual space, a memory prison built brick by brick to erase the innocence of every soul trapped inside. The preacher who discovered it never spoke publicly again. Some say he was committed. Others say he disappeared. But his journal pages, smuggled out by his sister, tell of twisted cages fashioned from rusted iron and leather belts, of children drugged into silence, of voices chanting in a language even he could not decipher. He wrote that the room felt hungry, as if it breathed with each scream held back in the walls, as if the house itself was feeding on the terror. And in the center of that room, an altar, not Christian, not pagan, something else, something older, worn down by blood and time. The Sullivan family were no ordinary settlers. They arrived in Virginia with wealth unexplained, land acquired without paperwork, and the house itself was built atop what used to be a Civil War-era cave network. Long before the war, long before settlers, something lived down there, and the Sullivans used it. But this isn't about ghosts. It's about power, control, the kind passed down through silence and sacrifice. You still think this was just a horror story? You haven't seen anything yet. The local sheriff filed no report. No warrants were ever issued. The neighbors who heard screams said nothing, because some secrets don't go missing by accident. They get buried. Inside the Sullivan home was a hidden door. Behind the root cellar, covered in floorboards soaked with ash, leading to rooms not marked on any blueprint, stone rooms with hooks in the walls, cages not for animals. And in the far back, a wall lined with tiny beds carved from oak, each labeled by Roman numeral 1 through 47, the journals Aish. There is a reason this never reached newspapers, a reason no court transcripts exist, a reason the land was purchased 3 months after the discovery by a foreign investor who never set foot in Virginia. Because when the preacher told the church, and when his sister brought the journals to town, a group of men came, not police, not militia, but men in long coats, riding horses without insignias, men who carried fire, not justice. They burned the house the next night. No investigation, no questions, just flames, and the townspeople. They watched. They said nothing. Some looked relieved, others looked afraid. But all of them understood one thing. What happened in that house was not supposed to survive. But the preacher's sister, She had already copied the pages. She had already memorized the names, the numbers, the map of tunnels beneath the forest. And she knew this wasn't just a one-time event. This was a site, one of many, each operated under a different family, each serving a singular purpose: to create obedience through trauma, to manufacture loyalty through suffering. And once you understand that, you begin to see the pattern in orphanages, in schools, in hospitals, places where no one questions screaming behind closed doors. This is not conspiracy. This is history, buried under politeness and paved roads, but still pulsing beneath our feet. By 1842, all records of the Sullivan family vanish. No land deed, no death certificate, no public sale of property. It is as if they were deleted. But the children, the ones who survived, did not disappear. They were absorbed, rebranded, given new names and placed into handpicked families across the eastern states. Some grew up quiet and strange. Others went on to become men of influence, judges, doctors, even senators. And with them they carried the fragments of what they endured, buried under ambition and discipline. But it never left them. And for some, they continued the P. You ever ask yourself why certain names vanish from the public record? Not change spelling, not fade with time, vanish, deleted with precision, wiped from every ledger, birth registry, even gravestones. The Sullivan name didn't disappear naturally. It was erased, surgically, by men who understood what it meant to hold power through silence. 3 months after the raid, every member of the town's militia who entered that basement was relocated. Suddenly, some dishonorably discharged, others voluntarily institutionalized. One, Samuel Dorr, sent dozens of letters over the following decade. Rants, they called them. But they weren't rants. They were warnings. He described dreams of red-lit corridors, children humming in unison, numbers seared into the backs of his eyelids. He said he couldn't go near a church without vomiting, that every night he saw the same figure at the foot of his bed, a boy with no eyes and a mouthful of teeth that didn't belong to him. Dorr's final letter, sent 2 weeks before he was found hanging in a barn, said only this: it wasn't a family. It was a design. He underlined it 10 times. What Dorr didn't know, or maybe knew too well, is that what happened in the Sullivan basement wasn't just torture. It was architecture. A blueprint to bend the mind, break the will, and rebuild a soul without its original parts. The number 47 wasn't random. It matched a sequence buried in Masonic texts, the same formula used to describe the perfect division of chaos and control. You thought this was about one family? No. This was a franchise of fear. By 1841, 7 years later, a minister named Calvin Draper began writing a personal journal. He claimed he had visions of rooms underground, floors tiled with vertebrae, and children singing lullabies in a language he didn't understand. Draper lived 2 towns over. He'd never stepped foot on the Sullivan property. But every page of his journal contained detailed diagrams of the house, of the basement layout, even of symbols carved into the stone walls. Symbols the public was never shown. He said they came to him in dreams. And then his daughter went missing. 2 weeks later, she was found, barely breathing, inside the ruins of the Sullivan home. She didn't speak for months. And when she finally did, she drew a spiral over and over again on the walls. Not a childish swirl, a precise mathematical spiral, a glyph traced in ancient cult practices, a design of ritual containment. Draper's journal was confiscated by the sheriff. Officially, it was lost in a fire. But 2 pages were salvaged by a cousin, and later leaked to a newspaper that refused to publish them. I have those pages. One diagram showed 47 individual positions mapped around a central pillar, each marked with a single word: obedience. The second page was worse. It was blank, save for 4 words scrawled in blood-red ink. It never ends with them. Draper vanished a year later. His house remains empty to this day. Locals swear they still hear humming from the well behind it. Not childlike, not innocent, practiced, mechanical, prepared for something bigger. You know what no one talks about. The ledger found in the ash drawer beneath the Sullivan fireplace. Charred but legible, written in a language that only a handful of scholars could partially decode. And even then, what they found was not a record. It was a script. A ritual sequence with exact timings, precise temperatures, and emotional states required for optimal harvest. Harvest of what? That part they left blank. Or maybe they feared to say it. One entry stood out, circled in red ink and annotated in English, the only line not in cipher. It read, "Separation begins when the child forgets their name." That line alone tells you everything you need to know. They weren't just imprisoning children. They were breaking identities, dismantling souls and rebuilding them as hollow vessels, not for control, not even for labor, but for conversion. Conversion into what? Into what the Sullivan family believed they themselves were born to be, vessels of an older code, a darker origin that predates America, that predates man. And if you think this ended in 1834, ask yourself this: why do similar basement structures keep surfacing in Montana, in Arizona, in upstate New York? All with identical brick patterns, all with sealed rooms. No entrances and traces of human nails clawed into the stone. Do you really think this was an isolated madness? Or was it the birth of something else? A doctrine passed in silence by bloodline and fire. You've heard of deep state operations, alphabet agencies, secret prisons. But what if I told you those were shadows of something older? Something far more patient, something that wears institutions like clothing. The Sullivan structure is a template, and that template was absorbed by men with far more power than the family itself. Because in 1852, just under 2 decades later, a quiet acquisition was made by a newly formed bureau whose name has since changed over 20 times, the Sully. Van basement blueprints were reclassified under psychic containment and stored beneath the Library of Congress in a vault that technically does not exist. And yet, one security contractor leaked a map, a single crude sketch, and on it 2 chilling words underlined in bold: test site, not archive. Test site, meaning the design was not historical. It was active, repurposed, and perhaps even scaled. And if that's true, it means the Sullivan experiment was a prototype, and the children weren't victims. They were variable subjects in a generational equation to calculate perfect submission. And guess what? That formula is still being used. Every time you scroll endlessly, every time your child stares unblinking at a glowing screen, every time a new trend erases a moral boundary. Ask yourself, what are they testing now? And who is chained in the basements we're not allowed to see? Because this never ended. It just changed floors. They say trauma leaves imprints, not just on minds but on structures. That wood absorbs energy. That stone retains pain. That blood soaks deeper than paint. And on the Sullivan property, even after the house was burned down, rebuilt, and burned again, the screams still echo. Locals stopped walking near it. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. Even animals refused to nest within 50 yards of the site. And during a construction survey in 1911, 3 workers vanished. Not one body was recovered. Not one tool was ever found. Just a single boot left at the basement threshold, facing inward. Inward, toward what? That question is why the land was never resold. It sits untouched under the ownership of a foundation that does not appear on tax records funded through shell corporations traced back to a single family name. Not Sullivan. Whitford. The Whitfords were known political financiers, and yet one branch of their family went completely dark in the 1870s, moved to Canada, changed names but kept acquiring land across the United States, and every parcel shared one thing in common: underground caverns reinforced with the same Sullivan brick pattern. You still think this is about one family? No, it's about a network, a bloodline, a ritual that mutated into infrastructure, and behind every respectable surname, every philanthropic foundation, every sealed government contract, there's a room that's never shown a name, that's never spoken, a chain that's never broken. Now listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is not theory. It is not myth. It is transcription. One of the Sullivan children survived. She was 6 at the time, mute for 3 years after her release, and then one day began drawing symbols on every surface she could find. Not letters, not pictures, but arrangements complex, impossible to decipher until decades later, when a linguist identified their origins from Mesopotamian sigil systems, pre-D, aiding language itself. She died institutionalized in 1893. Her final drawing carved into the wall above her bed. 6 symbols in a spiral, one resembling a house, the next, a key, then an eye, a door, a flame, and finally a blank circle. That symbol has appeared on the seals of 3 secret societies, 2 of which officially no longer exist. And the third, you've seen their symbol, on a building near you, on a dollar bill, behind the podium of your leaders. They are not hiding because they don't need to. They've trained you not to look, and when you do see, you laugh, dismiss, call it conspiracy, and return to sleep. But you're not asleep anymore, are you? No. Because if you've made it this far, you feel it too, that pressure behind your eyes. That quiet certainty that everything you were taught to believe about power, about government, about family, was part of the veil, and now the veil is tearing, one revelation at a time. You think the chains were the worst part, but you'd be wrong. The chains were just containment. The true experiment was in the silence. Each child was given a number, not a name, stripped of identity, taught only to obey sound and gesture. No speech, no song, no memory. Blank minds shaped like clay. And that silence, that void, became a mirror for something else. Something older. Reports recovered from a burned-out church nearby claimed that the Sullivan family used harmonic frequencies in that basement, tuned instruments not for music, but for resonance. Low droning tones played for hours until the children twitched, screamed, seized. One boy, number 19, would claw at his own ears until they bled whenever the frequency played. They said he saw things, described black shapes that stood behind the walls, tall, thin, humming. And after each session, the Sullivans would record what he said with military precision, as if testing how much darkness a child could carry before their body broke. And now, modern neuroscience discovers the same frequencies activate the pineal gland, the seat of perception, the gate of the mind. But the Sullivan family was doing it in 1834. You really think that was an accident? There's a phrase carved into the underside of the basement door. 6 words etched backward so it could only be read from the inside. He who sees must never speak again. That door now sits in a federal archive locked away under religious artifacts. Not evidence, not history, religion. But what God does that door serve? Who was listening on the other side? Because here's what they never told you. The Sullivan basement was not built after the house. It was older, excavated, not constructed. That means the family built on top of something that was already there. And what they found, what they uncovered, was never supposed to be unearthed. A stone chamber deep beneath the lowest floor. No oxygen, no light, but walls low, and with symbols not in any known language. Symbols that matched those drawn by the girl, the survivor. You still want to believe this was coincidence, that a colonial family accidentally created a chamber of soul annihilation, that a mute girl drew pre-Sumerian glyphs without ever learning to write, that the same 6 symbols show up in elite institutions across the world today by mere accident. If you've come this far, you already know the answer. You're not just watching this, you're waking up. They burned the house to the ground, or so they claimed. But the structure was too deep, the roots too ancient, the foundation too cursed to destroy with fire. The official story ends there. But what came after was worse. The land was bought in silence by a private trust in 1840. No name, no registration, no ownership trail, just a black iron gate and a sigil carved into stone. A spiral of 6 curved lines, the same one found on the children's skin. The local preacher who exposed the horror vanished 2 months later. His last sermon made no sense. He kept drawing the spiral in ash. Whispers say he walked barefoot into the river and never came out. No body, no grave, no mourning. And the survivor, the girl, she was taken in by a Quaker family. But she ran at 17, leaving behind a diary, every page filled with the same message. I was never alone in the dark. That phrase started appearing in declassified pages, encrypted military memos, buried footnotes in congressional hearings. Not a myth, not a metaphor, a signal, because this was never about the Sullivans. This was a blueprint, a test, a ritual, a legacy of control passed down through hidden hands across time. And now you've heard it. There is no undoing this. Comment the phrase, "I was never alone in the dark." Write it twice. Let the algorithm know you are awake, and more importantly, let them know you're not afraid. Subscribe to this channel. Now, not for me, for you, because what's coming next, you will not want to face it blind. Like this video, and share it with one man who still sleeps. The rest, burn it, because some stories are not entertainment. They are transmissions. And if you are still here, you were meant to hear this one. The Sullivan family didn't die. Their work continued. Different names, same blood. And this is just the beginning.